What is up, and welcome to another video where I face the music by looking back at my preseason takes and seeing how they hold up. This time, we're talking about the ACC. I'm going to go ahead and throw out my personal final rankings for the ACC on the screen now, and I will be comparing these to my preseason rankings that I shared before the season. So sit back, relax, maybe like, maybe comment, and subscribe, and let's go ahead and get right into it. Getting into our rankings, number 17, I have the Stanford Cardinal. And it wasn't too long ago that Stanford was a smash-mouth powerhouse, turning out NFL linemen and winning double-digit games. But now they're still looking for a permanent head coach, and last season was just so forgettable that most fans didn't even really watch. Turnovers, failed third downs, and one of the worst O-lines in the conference turned them from bad to basically invisible. This year, I do think we should see some improvement, but not enough to climb too far. Offense will be better than last year, but again, that's a low bar. Offensive line adds some transfer help, so it should be a little bit less of a disaster, but depth is still thin, and nobody looks like an obvious anchor here. At quarterback, there is a glimmer of hope in Elijah Brown. He's talented, and if the line holds, he might keep Stanford respectable. As for the running back room, they are fine, but not really. Yeah, so going back a little bit on what I said, I wanted to make sure I catch some of that. This year actually looked pretty identical to what Stanford was last season. I had them a bit higher in my final season rankings, but that is more to do with the ACC as a whole being just absolutely atrocious and less about Stanford exceeding my expectations in any way. There really wasn't much to be impressed about with Stanford this season. Offensively, they were somewhat competitive in several games, but they only came away with 3 wins on the season, one of which came against or with significant help, I should say, from the officiating crew. Their only win that I thought was pretty impressive on any level was probably their win over Cal, who was more of a middle-of-the-pack ACC team anyways. They just had far more embarrassing performances than good ones, which, you know, they lost to like Hawaii at the start of the season. They only managed to beat San Jose State by 1, not to mention their losses to other just terrible teams in their conference. So I had to say this was a pretty bad Stanford team. As for the identity of the team, they didn't really have one, especially on offense. Quarterback ended up being pretty mediocre at best. They ended up starting Ben Goldbranson instead of Elijah Brown, which surprised me. Not that I think that it would have made a huge difference considering the pieces around him, but I do think that Brown was the better quarterback, and we got to see him a little bit. We got to see him start the last 3 games of the season, and that's when they got their win over Cal, and just looked a bit better overall on offense when they had him. Goldbranson, he just had a limited downfield accuracy, turnover issues, and he just never could elevate the offense. So I think the switch to Brown should have come a bit sooner, honestly. And now, you know, Brown is transferred to Washington, so no real bright side there. So yeah, that's what I have to say about that. Spectacular, and they're going to struggle if blocking doesn't improve. Their weapons are really uninspiring. Yeah. Receivers were an issue last year, and while some transfers came in, there's not really a proven playmaker in this year. For Brown to shine, they're going to need someone to emerge as a reliable target, which is still a really big unknown. On defense, they're thin. Yeah, offensive line play was, like I said, it was an issue as expected. They allowed frequent pressure. They were inconsistent in run blocking, and they weren't able to really establish physical dominance. They did have some flashes from the skill position players, but nothing really sustainable here. And it didn't help that their play calling was pretty predictable due to them just being so limited in so many areas, along with their lack of depth. So yeah, offense wasn't great. And vulnerable. Last year's defense was among the worst in the conference, especially against the pass. But this year, the back end is still alarmingly thin. Colin Wright should be a solid piece at corner, and there's some returning experience on the D-line and at linebacker, but overall, there's just not enough talent or depth to scare ACC offenses. overall, there's just not.
Yeah, I was pretty spot on as far as their defensive weaknesses and strengths ended up, or I guess it's not really strengths, but as far as their defense as a whole ended up being, their biggest weakness was on the back end as expected. They gave up way too many explosive chunk plays, and they just really struggled in coverage. They were the second worst team in the country when it came to pass yards allowed, and the D-line was just inconsistent, which is a word that I could use to describe a lot of this team. They just didn't get a lot of pressure, and they struggled to stop the run. Just overall, a very, very inconsistent team that usually couldn't put together a full 4 quarters of football on offense or on defense.
Any clear identity to this team or the head coach stability. Offense has holes everywhere, and defense remains porous, especially in the secondary.
Yeah, I mean, they lack depth, they lack talent, good coaching, they lacked just pretty much they lacked a lot of things, and that's not a combination of things that you want to be lacking in. They were towards the bottom of the country in most defensive metrics. They finished number 15 in my final ACC rankings, but again, Stanford turned out pretty much exactly as I expected them to. I just didn't anticipate how bad the ACC would actually be, so there are somehow 2 teams even worse than them.
At number 16, I have the Wake Forest Demon Deacons. And after last season's struggles, Wake Forest decided to clean house. New head coach, new OC, new DC, and goodbye
Honestly,
to
it
the
was a good
trademark
decision.
slow mesh offense.
Yeah.
In its place is a faster system with more outside runs and hopefully the spark that the Demon Deacons need to succeed. But turnover isn't just on the sideline, it's everywhere on the field as well. On offense, they are almost entirely new, for better or for worse. The offensive line was brutal last year, so the new staff went heavy in the portal, and they're replacing almost every starter, including adding a star tackle from Washington State, whose name is a little too hard to pronounce here, so I'm not going to do it, but his talent is undeniable. Even if the line doesn't become a strength overnight, it should be better simply because it really can't get much worse. At running back, they have a solid returner who should benefit if the O-line stabilizes. And he's going to need to do good because a lot's going to ride on the ground game while the passing attack takes that time to gel and get sorted out. At quarterback, it's an open battle.
Yeah, so it turns out that cleaning house is exactly what Wake Forest needed because they had a surprisingly good season with several trademark wins. They beat teams like Virginia and SMU, who were 2 of the best teams in their conference this season at least. They also got screwed out of a win over Georgia Tech by the refs if we were really going to dig deep here. Sure, their schedule wasn't the most difficult, but they won plenty of games that they would not have in the past. However, they also had some really rocky moments as well. They won a really ugly 1-point game against Kennesaw State to start the season, and no shade to Kennesaw State. They were actually really good at the G5 level, but they should not be competing that closely to power conference teams like this. Wake Forest also took a 42-7 beatdown to my Florida State Seminoles, which actually made them really hard to place in my final rankings because it's really hard to look at a team that got obliterated and saying that they are a better quality team than the team that just blew the doors off of them. But at the end of the day, they were the more consistent team than Florida State, and they beat teams that Florida State couldn't. So they're here. Anyways, which I guess you don't really know what ranking they are. I'm going to tell you that in a second.
On one end, you have Robbie Ashford, who is a mobile guy, dual threat guy.
Yep.
And on the other side is Deshaun Purdue, who's more of a traditional arm type of guy. I expect Ashford to win out because of his ability to make big plays on the ground, which might be needed, again, if the receivers take that time to gel. Speaking of receivers, it's a brand new group except for one returning starter who played significant snaps. There's no proven stars here, so someone is going to have to step up and step up fast. On defense, they're also in transition. New DC.
So they did end up going with Robbie Ashford, like I expected them to. And while he was a bit turnover prone, he was the right guy for the job. His extra mobility was huge for the Demon Deacons. Their offensive line did improve. They still weren't the most physical group on the field, and they were inconsistent, but they were so much more improved over last year's unit. But they did enough to allow Damon Claymore to shine at running back, and the wide receivers got some action as well. They had a pretty well-balanced attack here, for the most part at least. Although against better opponents, their offense pretty much it was not nearly as good. They struggled, especially in the red zone. Plus, they had some discipline and major turnover issues as well.
The new philosophy and several new faces via the portal, many following their head coach from Washington State. It's not going to be elite overnight, but there's hopes that they'll be more aggressive and fundamentally sound than they were last season. But here's why I think they might struggle. When you are adding a new scheme, a new players, and new staff all at once, it can be a lot. It usually takes a season to figure out the right combinations and the right chemistry. So to me, this feels like a bridge season. More about finding out what Wake Forest next.
Yeah, defensively, they were, again, pretty inconsistent, but they usually showed up when their offense was struggling. The SMU and Virginia games are both really great examples of this. I think the final scores of many of the games are deceiving because Wake Forest defense was constantly facing short field positions thanks to the offense turning the ball over so much, which isn't completely fair to them. They were a serviceable defense that was able to keep them competitive in a lot of games. Overall, Wake Forest performed much better than I expected.
Next identity is than chasing immediate success. At number 15.
And yeah, so I mentioned a little earlier that it felt like a bridge year for Wake Forest. I did not really feel at the end of the season like this was a bridge season for Wake Forest. They cleaned house, and the guys that they brought in seem to make the program a lot better. However, I do think that their lighter schedule made them look better than they actually were at times. They got exposed in a few games, the FSU game being the prime example here, but they did well with what they were given. So I put them at number 10 in my final rankings, which is pretty far off from what I had them here in the preseason at number 16.
I have the Virginia Cavaliers. And last season was pretty rough for Virginia, especially on offense where they finished second to last in scoring, and on defense where they couldn't even buy a sack. So they did what most struggling programs do and hit the portal hard, bringing in over 30 new faces that tried to flip that script. But how did they do?
Man.
Well, they brought in a transfer quarterback in Chandler Morris, and at the G5 level, he showed flashes. Mobile, competitive, and better than what the Cavs trotted out last season. But playing against ACC defenses is a different challenge, and he's unlikely to be a true game changer in my opinion. At the skill positions, the Cavs did lose last year's best producers, but to be fair, those guys weren't really lighting up scoreboards anyways.
Okay, so before I go any further, obviously I was way off with Virginia. They ended up being pretty good. But like with Wake Forest, like I said, the transfer portal greatly benefited the Cavaliers. They were the number one team in the conference until they got beat in the ACC championship game by Duke, which is definitely not what I predicted here, having them all the way down at 15. I had them at number 2 in my final ACC rankings, so this may be the largest disparity in any of my videos between preseason prediction and actual postseason success or actual season success. Chandler Morris did end up being a game changer, which clearly I did not see coming. Like I said, he showed some flashes at the G5 level, and I did expect him to be better than what they had last season, but I did not expect him to be as good as he was since he was going up against a different level of competition, and yet he was a huge reason Virginia saw the success that they did. He was mobile, and he could just sling the ball, man. He accounted for 3,000 yards on offense. He was just tough, dude. So, yeah, I was very, very wrong about Chandler Morris and at Virginia as a whole.
They also added in some transfer wide receivers and running backs, but nothing there really screams star to me. The one bright spot, though, is Trell Harris, who should return from injury and give Morris at least one reliable target. The real question here is the offensive line. Can they stop the bleeding? Last year's O-line was bad, the biggest single weakness on the team. So they added some bodies via the portal, and they also lost some key pieces. Net improvement, probably. It almost has to be, but it's unclear how big of a jump that will be. If the line gels quickly, then Morris could look like a solid ACC quarterback. If not, I'm afraid it might be another long season. On defense, it's...
As for skill position players, Trell Harris, returning from injury, he was a big piece for the Cavaliers. He was actually their best wide receiver on the season, and the run game was also very productive, led by Jamari Taylor. They did see some improvement along the offensive line, although they did also struggle against some stronger fronts. But yeah, pretty solid.
A bit of patchwork, but with an upside. The secondary lost major contributors, but they replaced them with experienced transfer safeties, a smart move that should help stabilize them on the back end.
At cornerback, though, that remains a glaring question mark. Up front, the Cavs have been allergic to sacks the past few years, and they did bring in some new faces to help, and they also return some linebackers who at least add some leadership and continuity. Overall, the defense feels slightly better. Deeper, older.
Yeah, the transfers made a difference on the defensive side of the ball as well as the offensive side of the ball. They ended this season as a top 20 unit on defense. They were solid pretty much across the board, really. The secondary was much better. The run defense was also much better. And they significantly increased their sack output, which was one of their biggest downfalls the season before. I'm not saying that they were elite this season, but they were definitely better than I expected them to be. Overall, this was just a very impressive season for the Cavaliers. Yeah.
Older and hopefully a bit meaner as well. And here's why I think they might surprise some people. The huge transfer class means new energy. There's a better quarterback and at least some upgrades to the O-line and in the secondary. So in theory, the offense should climb out of the basement. However, so many new players means major chemistry risk. Morris is an upgrade, but not a star. Skill talent is thin, and the O-line could still be a problem. On defense, corners could be picked apart all season long. So in summary, Virginia got more experienced, more athletic, and more interesting, but it's still a patchwork team, and big improvement is not guaranteed, just possible.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, with any of these teams that take in a bunch of transfer players, you never know how it's going to turn out. For Virginia, it turned out great. For other teams, it turned out terribly. So whenever you add, even if they're really talented players, when you add so many of them to your team, you never know what you're going to get. I mean, like LSU. LSU was not that great this year, even though they added some portal players. So you just never know. And this year, it greatly benefited Virginia. They could use the same technique next year, and it could be terrible for them. I mean, you just have to wait and see. Yeah, it was a very impressive season for Virginia. They did get exposed a little bit towards the end of the season. They had a chance to make the playoffs, but fumbled it away in the ACC championship game when they lost to Duke. But still, massive respect to the coaching staff and the transfers that came in. They really did bring Virginia out of the dumps and turn them into a competitor. So, yeah.
Number 14, I have the Cal Golden Bears. And it still baffles me that this team plays in the Atlantic Coastal Conference when they can basically see the Pacific Ocean from campus. But conference map aside, the real problem here is not geography, it's the offense. And they look to take a real step back this season. On offense,
yeah,
they
when you
lost
lose
last
Mendoza,
year's quarterback in Fernando Mendoza and star running back Jay Knott, as well as Javian Thomas and most of the depth behind him. They tried to patch the running back room via the portal, but it still feels thin and underwhelming. Unless someone really breaks out unexpectedly, the run game could be a real liability for this team. At quarterback, they have Devin Brown transferring in, and he has a solid pedigree, but he's unproven at this level. There's also some buzz around a promising young freshman who could challenge for the job, but either way, I think this position is shaky. The wide receiver group was nothing special to begin with, and there's really not too much to get excited about now. The offensive line was outright bad last year, and yes, it's a bit deeper now thanks to some transfers, but depth does not always mean quality. At best, I think it improves from liability to below average. Overall, on paper, this offense just does not scare anyone. On defense, the good news...
Yeah, so losing Mendoza turned out to be a major blow for Cal, considering he won the Heisman Trophy, he won the national championship with another team, and he's looking to be the first overall pick in the NFL draft. So obviously they lost a very quality player that would have improved their team if he had stayed. So yeah, Cal definitely lost. They felt that loss of offensive stars just leaving. However, there were some standout players that helped them put up some points in some games. Their freshman quarterback did end up starting over Devin Brown, and he looks like a rising star, honestly. Buddy could sling the rock. He threw for over 3,000 yards, which is obviously very impressive in your freshman year, although he did not provide any threat on the ground. In fact, his rushing numbers are pretty far in the negative since he got sacked 30 times this season, which obviously does not reflect well on the offensive line, who struggled in pass protection and run blocking. Speaking of the run game, they were second to last in rushing yards per game in the entire country, and second to last also in total rush yards as well. So
they could not run the ball to save their lives. So they really, really struggled in that category. Luckily, they were top 20 when it came to passing the ball. They asked a lot of that freshman quarterback and from the receivers, and for the most part, they delivered. But this was an offense that, on the whole, did see regression, which is not super surprising. I mean, you're losing guys like Jaden Knott, you're losing guys like Mendoza. Obviously, Jaden Knott didn't end up panning out as well as we thought he would, but still, you're losing star players. So the fact that they even saw some progression from the quarterback, it was nice, but yeah, it's not going to live up to what we could have had with Mendoza. The line and linebacker group is actually pretty respectable. They have a returning talent group that should hold up against the run, but the bad news is the secondary lost some key starters and the replacements are largely transfers. They might gel, but it's a question mark that could be exposed by pass-heavy ACC teams. But here's why I think they could overachieve. If Devin Brown adapts quickly, the freshman quarterback can add real competition, and the offense might find that spark that they need. And if the front seven can turn pressure into actual sacks, that would help protect a vulnerable secondary. However, the offense lost its engine in Jaden Knott. So I quickly brushed through defense there, but they were pretty middle of the pack across the board. They didn't get a lot of pressure up front. They weren't great at stopping the run. They didn't make teams turn the ball over very much. They did have some solid pieces in the secondary, but the unit on the whole was just okay at best. Overall, the season was a pretty mixed bag for Cal. They had some major upsets like wins over teams like SMU and Louisville, but they also got shut out 34-0 to San Diego State, and they even lost to Stanford 31-10. And its quarterback and the replacements don't look ready to carry the load. The O-line still looks like a bottom-tier ACC unit, and there isn't enough elite talent at receiver to keep defenses honest. And number 3, yeah, all things considered, I do think that the season went better for them than I expected it to. I had them ranked number 11 in my final ACC ranking, so just a few spots higher than I had them here in the preseason. 13, I have Boston College. Yuck.
And it's no secret that I am not a believer in Bill O'Brien as a head coach.
Nope.
And heading into year 2, there's very little to suggest that Boston College is ready to make a real jump. There's just too many holes, too many question marks, and not enough proof that this staff can elevate the roster. On offense, they're unsettled at quarterback and thin up front. Castellanos is gone, and let's be real, even he only provided occasional sparks before he got benched. So now it's a battle between the guy who replaced him and Alabama transfer Dylan Lonergan, neither of whom scream game changer to me. So quarterback is likely a liability, not a strength. There are pieces as far as weapons go. Explosive running back Jordan McDonald could be the lone star on offense, and veteran wide receiver Lewis Bond and Reed Harris add size and experience. But the offensive line is replacing 3 starters, and that was a unit that already struggled in the red zone last year. Hard to see how this offense suddenly clicks under Bill O'Brien, who frankly hasn't shown he can scheme around these issues. On defense, they are missing the... Yeah, dude, my disbelief in Bill O'Brien was validated once again. I'm honestly surprised they are still letting him coach. Dylan Lonergan, he did end up being the starting quarterback, and it's hard to put a ton of blame on him for this season. He passed the ball well enough to make the Eagles a top 20 passing attack, but he did not offer much in terms of mobility, which Boston College desperately needed since they were completely inadequate at running the ball. Obviously, Jordan McDonald, he did not pan out how I expected him to. In fact, he wasn't even the best running back they had, which is honestly pretty impressive because it's not like they had much going on the ground there in the first place. Lewis Bond and Reed Harris, however, did live up to my expectations as being offensive stars. Outside of that, they were pretty mediocre at best across the board when it comes to offense. They weren't super efficient in the red zone. Their offensive line wasn't very good, and they weren't really they were just a very one-dimensional team, which was pretty easy for teams to adjust to and adapt to, especially the better opponents on their schedule. But as mediocre as their offense was, they weren't the reason they ended up winning only 2 games during the season, which I'll get to that in a second. Difference makers. The departure of Donovan Ezraku, an All-American pass rusher, is absolutely brutal. They have some experienced players up front, but nobody who can replace that level of production. They do have a solid veteran secondary, likely to be the best unit on the team, but with a pass rush that figures to be worse, even that group may end up being exposed. Here's what little hope I think that there is for... Yeah, their defense was atrocious. I mean, they
definitely felt the loss of production after losing what they did last season. The only defense worse than them in the conference was Syracuse, whose defense was generationally bad even then. Boston College's defense was even worse in some ways, so it was just so bad. Out of 136 teams in college football, they ranked 131st in opponents' yards allowed, making them the easiest power conference team to move the ball on. And they ranked 126th in total defense, making them the worst defense in the power conference overall. They were bottom 25 in the country in both rushing yards allowed and passing yards allowed. And on top of that, they had one of the worst sack rates in the country and one of the worst turnover margins in the country as well. So there were no shining lights on defense. The solid veteran secondary I mentioned did not pan out, and nothing else on defense did either. It was awful for this team. Jordan McDonald could carry that offense. He's a veteran receiver who can bail out shaky quarterback play. And the secondary might keep them in games if the front holds up. But here's why I'm not buying the Boston College stock. Again, Bill O'Brien has not proved he can elevate an average roster.
Nope.
Major O-line questions after losing 3 starters, no proven quarterback, red zone inefficiency from last year likely sticks around, and the pass rush takes a clear step back. Overall, I'm just not convinced Bill O'Brien has the answers, and this roster is not built to cover those coaching gaps. Expect another grinded-out season in Chestnut Hill with the same old red zone struggles, leaky pass protection, and an offense that never really gets rolling. Yeah, like I said, I have never been a Bill O'Brien fan, and this season gave me no reason to have any faith in him going forward. The offense had some bright spots, and they kept them in some very competitive games, but they had a generationally bad defense that lost them almost every game they were in. They bookmarked the season with wins, but those were the only 2 wins they got all season, and they were to terrible teams like Syracuse and Fordham. So nothing to be proud of for Boston College. They just weren't, at least they weren't their worst team because they did end up beating Syracuse. So there was one team worse, I guess. Yeah, they finished the ACC, my ACC rankings. I don't know if I already said it, but second to last. So we're still kind of close to that range here, but they were pretty awful. Number 12, I have the North Carolina Tar Heels. And there is a lot of excitement around Bill Belichick's first season in Chapel Hill. And there's good reason to be. He is an NFL legend. But this is college football. It's not the NFL. And in year 1, with so much roster turnover, it's hard to see a team like this make serious noise right away. On offense, they bring in a new quarterback in Gio Lopez from South Alabama. And honestly, I do like the fit. He's accurate, he protects the football, and he has enough mobility to make plays. Exactly the kind of quarterback that Belichick usually leans on. But the big question in here is, can this new look offense gel quickly? Skill positions, they have talent, but no proven stars. Losing Omarion Hampton is brutal, and the 2 solid backs that return are solid, but it's impossible to replicate Hampton's production. Depth is fine, but the running back room likely takes a step back. At wide receiver, there is raw talent, but almost nobody is proven. Lots of portal additions, but it's hard to trust chemistry this early. If everything clicks, it could be a really dynamic unit. But if not, expect highlight plays mixed with long droughts. The tight end group is also largely new, adding to that uncertainty, but the offensive line is more experienced on paper. But much of that experience does come from outside of the program. They might avoid being a liability, but it's unclear if they'll actually be a strength for this team. On defense, as expected, the Bill Belichick experiment is not panning out in Chapel Hill. A lot of people had high expectations because of his history in the NFL, but I was not fooled because college football is an entirely different sport than what the NFL is. So yeah, sure, he is a Hall of Famer, or should be. I know there's some conspiracy there, but he should be. But in college football, it's a different sport. So I was not surprised at all to see the Tar Heels have a pretty rough season under him. Gio Lopez, he was not the star that he needed to be to elevate this North Carolina offense. He wasn't a disaster or anything like that, but I don't think he was what they were hoping to get from him. Sure, he had some extra mobility and showed flashes, but he did not end up being the accurate guy that I thought he was going to be. He ended up being pretty inconsistent. The timing with receivers was off. He forced balls into coverage, missed some easy checkdowns, and just didn't take what the defense gave him a lot of the times. It isn't all on him, though. The offense as a whole just they lacked a true identity, honestly. They couldn't run the ball. They couldn't pass the ball. The offensive line did end up being a liability. In fact, they were one of the worst in the entire country, if we're being honest. So just nobody stepped up offensively. The new faces did not pan out, and the talent potential was just never realized. And as a result, they probably had the worst offense in the conference. New scheme, new faces everywhere, especially up front. The entire defensive line is made up of new starters, and the linebacker unit only has a couple of returners, meaning there's almost no continuity. They needed to fix the run defense, which was awful last year, but it's unclear if talent alone can do that. The bright spot, though, the secondary has most returning experience and should be solid. But coverage does not matter if opponents can run all over you again. In summary, there is some intrigue here. Belichick makes this team the most... Yeah, the defense was not nearly as bad as the offense. They still weren't great, but they were more middle of the pack, whereas the offense was just atrocious. Like I said, run defense actually did get a lot better here. Like I said, it was a weakness for the season before, but it was actually probably their biggest strength this season, and it was the secondary that actually lagged behind a little bit. The defensive line was also pretty good at generating pressure and getting sacks, and at the end of the day, the defense was not good enough to bail out the offense. North Carolina had no significant wins on this season. They beat the two freebies on their schedule, and then they beat the two worst teams in the conference, Stanford and Syracuse. They had some close losses against some better teams sprinkled in there, but that's hardly something to brag about when you still lose those games. They were 13th in my final ACC rankings, just one spot lower than I have them here, so I was definitely right to doubt them this season. Unpredictable one in the ACC, but between the roster turn and the new scheme, growing pains feel inevitable. Expect moments of promise, but it's probably a rebuilding year more than a breakout. Yep. At number 11, I have the NC State Wolfpack. And it's a new era in Raleigh with two new coordinators, a faster-paced offense, and a defense built around pressure. Even so, NC State is not starting from scratch. They actually have a solid core returning, which keeps them interesting in 2025. On offense, CJ Bailey is back at quarterback. And he quietly impressed last year, showing poise and flashes of real playmaking. If he can cut down on the turnovers, which was his biggest issue last year, he could take a real step forward. The new OC should mean a quicker tempo and more spread concepts, which will fit Bailey's skill set pretty well, I think. In the backfield, they are thin but explosive. They lost some running backs, but honestly, those backs weren't really productive anyways. So enter Hollywood Smothers, who is small, quick, and effective. But the main problem here is going to be depth. If Smothers goes down, they're in trouble because that means they'll be a one-dimensional team. At a receiver, yes, they are losing Concepcion, who's one of their best weapons, but they did keep a decent group of receivers who should thrive in this faster system. Also, the tight end room looks solid and could become a real safety valve for this team. The offensive line did lose some starters on the right side, but the left side should be solid and could anchor this unit. They also have some depth, which helps overall. The O-line could actually be a strength, though watch that right side against better pass rushes because I think that might be a big weakness. On defense, up front, CJ Bailey did, in fact, take another step forward. He was one of the best quarterbacks in the conference this year, even if he still threw a fair amount of interceptions. Hollywood Smothers did end up being a productive back and a real workhorse for this offense. Jaden Bailey, he stepped up to support him as well. And, of course, CJ Bailey helped with rushing numbers as well with his mobility. And they were pretty successful through the air as well. The offense as a whole was inconsistent but explosive, which impressed me considering they lost their highest graded running back, wide receiver, and offensive lineman to the transfer portal last year, while their highest graded tight end ended up heading to the NFL. So they lost a lot, but they did some good backfilling, especially at tight end. Cody Hardy proved to be especially good at blocking, which was super helpful for the Wolfpack offensively. And the offensive line was pretty solid as we expected, and when the Wolfpack got in the red zone, they were pretty good at finding a way to score, which some of these other teams could not do. So props to the Wolfpack for that. Lost a bit of production, but they still have a deep, experienced line. At linebacker, veterans return, and Temple transfer Charles Thomas should add real quarterback pressure, matching with the DC's aggressive philosophy. Secondary is the big unknown. Mostly new starters, a mix of transfers and very young players. They could get burned early and against good passing teams, but there's a lot of raw talent here, and if the freshmen can adjust quickly, it might not be a disaster. In summary, new coordinators promise fresh.
Yeah, NC State's defense was less impressive than their offense. We knew the secondary was going to be a big question mark here, and it was answered in the negative. Only 3 teams in the country gave up more passing yards than North Carolina State did per game this season. So that obviously left them pretty vulnerable. They were pretty good at stopping the run, but they were still far from impressive. It was pretty easy for opposing teams to move the ball and score on them on this defense pretty much however they wanted to be honest.
Fresh energy. And there's enough experience here to think that the Wolfpack could actually be better than they were last season. But thin depth, a brand new secondary, and a quarterback who has to clean up some of those mistakes can keep them from feeling like true contenders. Still, definitely a team I think you should watch. At number 10,
yeah, at the end of the day, the North Carolina State offense was good enough to earn them the number 7 spot in my final ACC rankings. A few spots different than where I have them in the preseason here. I was a bit surprised by how their offense bounced back from what they lost, but unfortunately for them, their defense did not hold up their end of the bargain. Still, they improved from the season before, and they picked up some major wins over Virginia, Wake Forest, and the rival North Carolina, and they also had a bizarre win over Florida State, which still haunts me. So, good job, guys, I guess, but special teams in that game, let's just move on.
I have Syracuse. And Fran Brown made people believe in orange football last season. But this year looks tougher. They lost almost all their top offensive producers, and while there is homegrown depth and some promising young talent, the question is, can that translate into real production
gross
on
team,
the field?
Dude.
On offense, they're starting from scratch. They lost everything. Nation's passing leader,
It showed.
Running back LaQuint Allen, and their top 3 receivers, including Pena. So only one skill player who contributed meaningfully last season returns. So there is a lot to replace. And at quarterback, it's a true battle between LSU transfer Ricky Collins, who saw very limited snaps last season, and Notre Dame transfer Steve Angeli. Neither has proven much at this level, so odds are quarterback play is not going to be their strength. As for the receivers, it's a homegrown gamble. Instead of dipping into the portal, Syracuse is promoting mostly in-house receivers, which on the plus side means there's not really chemistry concerns because they know the system. On the downside, they aren't proven producers, so expecting them to replace Pena and company is probably unrealistic. At running back, they're also relying on some homegrown talent who hasn't shown big production yet.
Nope.
The O-line is where the portal help comes in. They brought in some transfers who specifically are there for pass protection, which matters in Fran Brown's offensive scheme. The line should be better, but there are still question marks, especially when it comes to run blocking. At defense, Syracuse is quietly putting together...
Yeah, so Syracuse lost everything, and it definitely showed. It feels almost unfair to talk about Syracuse because when Steve Angeli was at quarterback, they actually looked pretty solid, believe it or not, early in the season. They played Tennessee close for a while, and they even beat Clemson on the road, which was very impressive at the time. But after Angeli went down, it all went downhill for them. Nothing worked for them after that. They couldn't run the ball. They couldn't pass the ball. They couldn't score. The offensive line was bad. Just everything was honestly pitiful. A far, far, far cry from what the offense looked like last year and even from what it looked like at the beginning of the season. They just went, and it was like a giant dumpster fire. Awful.
A unit that could keep them competitive. At defensive end, losing Fidel Diggs does hurt, but David Reese should step in nicely, and David Omopario's development could give them real pass rush presence. Other portal additions help fill up the line, and depth looks okay. At linebacker, they did lose their leading tackler in Justin Barron, but there's enough talent here that they should be at least solid, if not spectacular. The secondary is deeper. You got Deuce Chestnut, who is legit. Devin Grant, who's another strong piece. They have a safety room that looks stacked. And a cornerback room, that's where the real question mark is. That position could get picked on by good passing teams. In summary, it's hard to lose.
Dude, so much for the defense carrying the team like I thought that they would. Defense was somehow even worse than the offense. They allowed an average of 39.5 points to be scored on them every single game. Yikes, dude.
That was good for 8th worst in the entire country. They have the 3rd worst turnover margin in the country. As you can imagine, teams really moved the ball on them however they wanted to, through the air, through the ground. It felt like watching a JV team play an NFL team at times. I watched Notre Dame score 70 points on them in regulation, which I think is more points than I've ever seen. Even when national championship contenders play like Division II or Division III schools, even then they don't score this many points. So just an embarrassment on every single level. So, of course, Syracuse was dead last in my final ACC rankings without hesitation. I guess I expected too much from them in the preseason. I only had them at 10, but that was way, way too much to expect from them. I thought that I was low on them as it was, but not low enough apparently. Even with Angeli, what was he supposed to do when the defense was chasing butterflies instead of playing actual football? I don't know. I don't know if Steve Angeli had played, if the whole team would have played better, the defense wouldn't have given up or something, but the way that it ended up, the way that it shook out was just one of the worst teams I've seen in college football in a long time, especially at the Power 4 level. Just ugh, awful. That much production and not feel it. Syracuse is betting on development and continuity from within, plus a few strategic transfers. And the defense might quietly carry them farther than people might think. On. But matching last year's magic is going to be tough. However, the foundation being built could pay off.
No magic at all.
At number 9, I have Virginia Tech. And the Hokies had the piece last year to make some real noise, but ultimately they fell short. This year, the roster isn't quite that talented, but some intriguing transfers and staff changes are cause for some real upside, if everything clicks. On offense, they bring in OC Philip Montgomery, who's known for developing quarterbacks, which is huge because Kyron Drones might be the most talented quarterback in the ACC. He's got a big arm and he's dangerous on the move, but he does also have some issues in the form of turnovers and durability concerns.
Yep.
So if Montgomery can unlock Drones' full potential, the Hokies could surprise everyone.
Yeah, Kyron Drones just never turned into the player that I thought he was going to be all year. He struggled to be consistent. He turned the ball over. He made poor decisions with the ball, and he just could not move the chains to save his life. He was mobile, sure, but that's really all he had. So did not turn out like I thought it would.
Running back, expect a committee approach led by bruising Bowling Green transfer Terrion Stewart. He brings toughness, but depth behind him is not super special. And at receiver, it's Aiden Green as the lone proven starter, a player who should shine as a true wide receiver 1. They did add some transfers to help, who could surprise, but depth is thin, and there's no guaranteed game breaker outside of Green. As for the offensive line, it's still their biggest question mark. It was the team's Achilles heel last year, and they allowed way too many sacks
and TFLs. They were fine.
They lost all 5 starters this year, including center Braylon Moore and top tackle Xavier Chaplin. And this new group is going to rely heavily on a West Virginia pipeline, including transfers like center Kyle Altuner, plus 2 of his teammates. And I think that will help with chemistry. The left tackle spot does still worry me, though, and overall it's impossible to know if this new line will gel quickly enough. On defense,
so if you couldn't tell by my reaction to Kyron Drones, the passing attack for Virginia Tech was super ineffective with him at the helm. 12th worst in the country to be exact. Super disappointing year from him, obviously. But also Aiden Green did not pop off a receiver like I thought he would. So it was really the running game that did most of the work, whether it was drone running or just one of the other backs. There wasn't a crazy star back or anything like that, but they did okay on the ground because they kind of had to. And the offensive line was fine. Like I said, they weren't terrible. So I guess better than last season, but nothing to write home about by any means.
They already forced turnovers and got pressure last year. But the big flaw was the defensive line. Enter new transfers plus solid returning pieces, the D-line should be stronger. At linebacker, this team might be at its best. They returned Jaden Keller and Caleb Woodson, plus they added in a Pitt transfer in Jordan Bass, who should help the pass rush. The front 7 could cause real problems. In the secondary, they lost some key takeaway artists in the back end, but adding Isaiah Cash at safety definitely helps, and corners, while a bit of a question mark, should hold up. In summary, Virginia Tech still has legit playmakers and a promising quarterback-OC combo. But if last year's more talented roster couldn't get it done, it's hard to fully buy into this year's slightly weaker group, unless everything breaks their way.
So much like the offense, the defense did not provide much reason for joy. They did not get a lot of pressure. They
weren't particularly good in the secondary or up front, nor did they create a lot of pressure. So the lack of talent in this group showed up big time and was a big contributor to them losing so many games. They did have two somewhat impressive wins over North Carolina State and Cal, but their only other win came against Wofford. So with 3 wins on this season, Virginia Tech landed the number 14 spot on my final ACC rankings. So they are yet another team that I expected to be I expected a bit too much out of, which is the theme for this conference so far. I just expected more from this conference as a whole and did not get what I expected. So,
Number 8, I have Pitt. And the Panthers were on a tear last year before injuries completely derailed their season. This year, I'm betting on them to look a lot more like the team we saw in September than what we saw later in the season last year. And that's if they can stay healthy. And that all starts with their quarterback, Eli Holstein, who's returning. And if he can stay on the field, he should recapture the early season form.
He did not stay on the field. Spoiler alert.
The same goes for running back Desmond Reed, who brings explosiveness and experience. So together, Holstein and Reed should give Pitt a rare continuity at key skill spots. And they also have a strong, underrated receiver group that should keep defenses honest. As for the offensive line, they were hammered by injuries last year, but they did add 3 portal transfers to shore up depth and hopefully cut down on the amount of sacks they let up. It's not an elite unit, but it should be better. As for the defense, this is the real...
Yeah, Holstein did not stay on the field. Instead, he was replaced by the hot new freshman quarterback, whose name I cannot pronounce. I think it's like Heinchel. Anyways, Desmond Reed didn't even end up being their go-to guy on the ground, but he did provide a threat in the passing game at least. I was honestly pretty impressed with the fact that that freshman quarterback was able to do what he was able to do as a 3-star true freshman. He gave them a much better chance to win than Holstein ever did, and that showed up in several key moments. Like in wins over Florida State, Georgia Tech, and North Carolina State. He led a top 20 scoring offense despite having an offensive line that left something to be desired, to say the least. As expected, though, I mean, that's what I said in here. I was expecting their offensive line to be not very great, and a running game that also was just not very effective. This offense did have a nice stable of talented receivers, though, like I said that they would, and that allowed that quarterback to spread the ball out and score points. So even though the offense took a different direction than I thought they would, with Holstein not being their guy, they still ended up being a pretty effective offense, all things considered. Strength of the team, and it's up front. They have Jimmy Scott, Nick James, John Fitzsimmons, and Blaine Spires, and they headline a pass rush that should be among the best in the conference. Behind them, the linebackers might be the best unit Pitt has, adding toughness and playmaking. The concern is the same as it usually is for Pitt, and that's the secondary. There's some promising homegrown talent and new transfers, but if there is a weak link on this team, it'll be right there. In summary, don't let last year's late season slip. Yeah, on defense, I feel like I was pretty spot on here. They were super solid at limiting the run, one of the best in the country, actually, and they were able to generate good pressure, but their secondary was far less productive. They didn't force many turnovers, and they were not great at limiting pass production from any of the teams they played, really. Slide fool you. This Pitt team still has legit upside. If Holstein and Reed stay healthy and the elite pass rush plays to its potential, they'll be right back in the mix near the top of the ACC. But depth issues in a shaky secondary mean they're walking a pretty fine line. Pitt actually had a pretty solid season. I think that their schedule helped them look better than they may actually have been. But they saved their harder opponents for the end of the season, and they got exposed a little bit at the end there. Still, they were one of the better teams in the ACC, managing an 8-win season. That landed them at number 5 in my final rankings in the ACC, a few spots higher than I have them here. So good for Pitt. Number 7, I have the Duke Blue Devils, and Manny Diaz did more than just keep Duke competitive last year. He overachieved, especially given how limited they were offensively behind a turnover-prone Malik Murphy. This year, there's real reason to believe that the Blue Devils could pair that nasty defense with an offense that can actually scare people. Speaking of offense, Duke landed a huge upgrade at quarterback with Darian Mensah from Tulane. Yep, his one-year lease.
He's a dual-threat guy who can hurt defenses with his legs and his arms. He's exactly the spark the offense lacked last season. They also bring back 4 starters along the offensive line that was elite in pass protection last season. Even if run blocking wasn't great, that experience does matter. And at running back, Jaquez Moore returns healthy, joined by the second leading rusher, Peyton Jones. So the backfield has depth and pop. And in the wide receiver room, that group looks quietly promising.
They return 2 solid contributors and add Oklahoma transfer Andrew Anthony, who should instantly be the number 1 option. Overall, this offense should be far more balanced and dangerous than what Duke put on the field last year. On defense, this is the main.
Yeah, somehow Duke won the conference this year, which I think goes to show just how crazy and honestly bad of a conference the ACC has been this season. Not that Duke was bad, but they were a 5-loss team playing for a conference title. To be fair, only 2 of those losses were in conference, but still, they won their conference and didn't make the playoffs, the 12-team playoffs, so that says something about them. Anyways, Darian Mensah, he did end up being an upgrade that Duke needed. He was probably a top 10 quarterback in the country, this at least in my opinion. Even if he was not as much of a dual threat as I expected him to be. But when you throw for almost 4,000 yards, that's usually not a big issue. And as you can imagine, Duke had a pretty lethal passing attack with those numbers. And that also led them to a very high scoring output. They had a guy, Cooper Barkate. He spearheaded that wide receiver core and eclipsed over 1,000 yards. He was one of the best receivers in the country, in my opinion. Andrew Anthony was not quite the difference maker that I expected him to be, but he did get some meaningful touches. The offensive line, they were solid, especially in pass protection, as expected. The run game, a little less effective. The guys I mentioned fell a bit on the depth chart to make way for their best rusher of the season, who was Nate Shepard, who actually was pretty solid. Overall, a very, very solid offense for Duke. That was one of the best in the ACC.
Any Diaz special. Even if the offense takes time to click, the defense is still the heartbeat of this team. They bring back sacking leader Wesley Williams and several other proven disruptors up front, so the pass rush should stay nasty. And at linebacker, the group was already solid, and now they add Jaden Francois, who could take them to the next level. At secondary, Duke has one of the best safeties in the conference in Terry Moore. His health is concerning, though, coming off of a bowl game injury, which will be something to watch.
Yeah.
At corner, they are anchored by the do-it-all Chandler Morris, and they have decent depth behind them. If there is a concern, it's depth at the safety room, but the starting group is as good as anyone's. In summary, Duke are...
Yeah, I was really, really shocked by how bad Duke's defense was this past season, especially with Manny Diaz at head coach. I thought this defense would be the strength of the team, but they were far from it. They were the worst in all of FBS in pass yards allowed. They definitely could have used Terry Moore back there, but his injury lasted all season, and he did not end up ever seeing the field. And without him, they were just completely and utterly terrible in the back end. The rest of the defense really fell downstream of that because the opponents, if they had a half-decent quarterback, there was not much Duke could do to stop them. Luckily for Duke, they were top 10 in turnover margin, which helped. But, yeah, defense did not cut it.
Already had a defense built to frustrate just about anyone. Add in a legitimate quarterback upgrade, returning playmakers, and more weapons on offense, and you get a Blue Devils team that could do serious damage in the ACC. If the offense hits most of its ceiling, Duke won't just be tough, they'll be downright dangerous. But we need to see it first.
So even with the abysmal secondary, Duke managed to end the season with an ACC championship trophy despite several head-scratching losses to teams like UConn and Tulane. They finished at number 7 in my final ACC rankings as well. So even if I was a bit off on why, I did have them in the right place in my final rankings and my preseason rankings. So there you go.
Number 6, we have my Florida State Seminoles. Go Noles. But last season, baby. It was nothing short
though they're terrible.
Of a total collapse for the Noles. Maybe the fastest fall from preseason hype to historical disappointment that I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And now, they cannot climb out of the hole, dude. Clean, big-name staff hires, new quarterback, and a completely retooled roster. But the question is, will it work? Please, please say that it will work.
Sorry.
On offense, I think the biggest move was bringing in Gus Malzahn at OC. And yes, I'm talking about that Gus Malzahn. Cam Newton's old OC, former Auburn head coach who played for a national championship, and most recently coach at UCF. If anyone is going to fix this offense, it's going to be him. At quarterback, Florida State is bringing in Thomas Castellanos from Boston College, who's the same guy who torched Florida State's defense in 2023. He's a dynamic dual-threat guy, but he's also short, inconsistent, turnover-prone, and he comes with some drama after clashing with his last head coach. Still, he can't be worse than DJU, right? And
Right.
Malzahn
He's
has a
not
track
that bad.
record with squeezing production out of imperfect quarterbacks, so I do have a little bit of hope there. As for the offensive line, they got a massive overhaul via the portal, and on paper, they could be elite, but in practice, transfers always come with some risk, as we saw last year, so we know that gelling is going to matter. At running back, Roydell Williams is returning after missing most of last season for injury, and he'll be splitting carries with Cam Davis and Samuel Singleton. It's a committee that I think should be average, but could look better behind a strong line. As for receivers, there are more portal hits. Deuce Robinson from USC has future NFL talent, and Squirrel White from Tennessee is explosive, and he's got a lot of speed. Landon Thomas is really the only notable returner at tight end, but the bottom line here is that the group should be miles better than last year, which is a pretty low bar. But it's still going to be heavily built on transfers, and it all hinges on how quickly Malzahn gets things clicking. On defense,
yeah, dude, I don't even know what I'm supposed to say about Florida State, honestly. They had a top 10 offensive line. They had the 11th most yards per game in the whole country. They had a decent mobile quarterback. They ran the ball well. They had a talented receiving core with Deuce Robinson and Mekhi Danzy. Heck, we even had a stud tight end in Randy Pittman Jr., and on paper, they had the best offense in the conference. So how the heck did they only end up with 5 wins? Well, for one, they could not get it done in the red zone, which was a huge issue. They could get all the way there and then just could not convert to points. And they also had a terrible turnover ratio. They had a disastrous special teams unit that led to some bizarre situations and outcomes, like, again, that North Carolina State game is burned into my brain. I don't even know how some of the things that happened in that game happened on the special teams front. Just inexcusable. I did like the Gus Malzahn hire, the Gus bus. I thought he did a great job with the offense, at least until we got into the red zone. But, man, it is hard to believe that the season turned out the way that it did with as much talent as we had on the field. It just felt so unlucky at times, like the universe just did not want Florida State to succeed. So, on paper, offense was great. When you're actually watching the games, points were not being scored. So, it's tough, man.
They made another splash hire. Tony White from Nebraska should be a slam dunk, known for turning good defenses into great ones. Florida State's going to switch from a 3-3-5
it wasn't like
to
we had a terrible
scheme,
defense either,
which means more aggression and more creativity. They'll miss Patrick Payton and Joshua Farmer, but the talent up front is still there. Darnell James and James Williams anchor the trenches, and Omar Graham Jr. leads a deep, experienced linebacker core. Secondary could be a strength. Edwin Joseph is a rising star, and Shaheem Brown and KJ Kirkland form a solid safety group as well. I do expect corner to be a weak link here, though, with Houston transfer Jeremiah Wilson having to step up immediately. In summary, there's a new staff, a new...
Yeah, dude, it wasn't like we had a bad defense either. We had a pretty solid defense, honestly. Teams did not move the ball very efficiently on us through the air or on the ground. Our pass rush was pretty solid for the most part. Nothing jumps off the page as a major deficiency for Florida State, other than head coach, because Mike Norvell needs to go. But that's a topic for a different day. Anyways, I thought Tony White was solid, but again, we just lacked any ounce of consistency. We could not force turnovers, and we gave the game away to lesser teams consistently. It's the only thing we could do consistently was give the game away to lesser teams. It was infuriating, dude. I hate talking about it.
Quarterback and a reloaded roster. So FSU feels like they have to bounce back. On paper, they have the ingredients. An elite OC, an aggressive defense, exciting weapons, but after last year's disaster, it's fair to wonder how quickly it will all come together, or does it blow up again? And I like what they built. I think it'll work, but for Mike Norvell, 2025 has to be a return to form. Anything else would be a disaster.
Apparently, it can be a disaster, and he could still have his job, but whatever. Anyways, even if on paper and through the eye test, they should be above teams like Wake Forest in my final rankings, who they blew the doors off of. They failed to be anywhere close to consistent enough to be placed any higher than where I have them. They had the talent and opportunity to be the best team on the field in almost every game they played, and most of the time, they just fumbled their chances away. So
that's why I just had to put them at number 12 in my final rankings. I did not enjoy doing it. It did not make me happy in any way, but my blind hope and faith did not pay off, so I was way off on Florida State. And knowing me, I'll probably do it all again next season. But I'm going to tell myself I'm not, because I can't keep falling for Mike Norvell and his hires and his transfer portal players and all this. Like, the team just gives up on him. Something's going on, and the team just gives up on Mike Norvell. Started out great. We beat Alabama to start the season. But, after one loss, everything went crazy. So I don't know what the mental fortitude of that team is not there. I think that's part of it. But anyways, let's move on because I'm spending a little too much time on getting a little too heated. So at number 5, I have the Miami Hurricanes. And I know ranking Miami this low will surprise some people, but hear me out.
Yeah, it was a little low.
Last year, I thought they were way worse than their record showed.
A little too low.
Yes, the offense was electric, number 1 in the nation, but it was built on Cam Ward's creativity and a loaded wide receiver room. This year, that's all gone. They lose Cam Ward, like I said, who's a mobile, dynamic, game-changing quarterback. They lose their star wide receiver in Xavier Restrepo, and they also lost their other top 4 receivers. And they're starting
running back. Yeah, they lost a lot, man.
They bring in Carson Beck, a talented quarterback, but he's fresh off of a significant injury. He's turnover-prone. He has zero mobility compared to Ward, and as a Georgia fan, I'm not sold that he is that guy, especially behind a
If y'all didn't know, I'm a Georgia fan and a Florida State fan. That's why I said I'm a Georgia fan. I went to school at Georgia. I played in the marching band at Georgia. I grew up a Florida State fan. Again, it's a story for another day, but in case you're wondering.
Bottom line, Beck can still be good, but he's a downgrade from Ward, no question, especially with this wide receiver group, which is built almost entirely through the portal. So don't expect Miami to look like the pass-first shootout team they were in 2024. But it's not all bad. They do return 3 O-line starters, including Francis Malagoa, plus some great portal additions. They have 2 productive backs who should They have 2 productive backs who should thrive if Miami leans more on that run-heavy side. If they adjust the offense to not put all of it on Beck's shoulders, it could work, but don't expect him to be Superman. On defense, we all know how.
Obviously, I was a bit too low on Miami. I will stand by what I said about the season before, about them, getting handed a lot of wins that season and the officiating crew helping them out and them being a little overrated. But they were pretty legit this season. Also, I hate where it's paused at right now. Give me one second. About it. That's a little better. Anyways, I really expected Miami to have a major drop-off offensively after Cam Ward and a myriad of their best players went to the NFL. And offensively, they kind of did. But unlike the season before, they had a much, much better defense to help counterbalance that offensive regression, make that less impactful, which we'll get into in a second. But as for Carson Beck, even though he made it further than Cam Ward did as far as the playoffs are concerned, he was definitely a step back from what Cam Ward was the year before, which, I mean, to be fair, anybody would be. It's not a slight on Carson Beck. Pretty much any quarterback this year is not as good as Cam Ward was last year. I think that's a pretty fair thing. I think even Fernando Mendoza, I think, is probably not as good as Cam Ward was last year. Beck was obviously not a mobile threat for the Hurricanes, but he was a super solid passer. Well, not super solid, but he was a solid passer outside of his turnover problem that reared its head in some of their biggest moments of the season, like their loss to SMU in overtime, or the infamous interception to eliminate Miami from the national championship game. I've never been a huge believer in Carson Beck, and I think he turned out exactly as I expected him to for Miami. He was serviceable, but definitely not an elite guy. Luckily, he had some aliens on his team that made his job a lot easier. They had a top 5 offensive line. They had a monster running back in Mark Fletcher, who was one of the best in the country. And Malachi Toney was just torching defenses as a true freshman wide receiver. He's already scary. He's going to get probably even better, which I can't even imagine. But Miami did not have to lean on their offense to win games. They just needed to be good enough because their defense was so elite.
it was at Miami last year. They were awful. So this year they're bringing in new defensive coordinator Corey Heatherman, who hopes to change that. And I think
Just
that he
complete
can. He
180,
built some
dude.
really tough defenses at
Complete
Minnesota,
180.
and now he has better raw talent to work with. The front is the strength here. Ruben Bain Jr. and Akeem Mesidor headline a dangerous athletic defensive line. But the biggest question mark here is the secondary. They brought in transfers everywhere to fix what was the worst unit last year. New faces mean potential, but again, also risk, especially if they don't gel. And at linebacker, they're losing team captain Francisco Malgoa, which definitely hurts, but the group overall has more depth than before. Even still, my concern is still depth. Bain and Mesidor are elite but injury prone, and an all-portal secondary could still struggle against the top passing attacks. In summary, offense will not be as explosive without Ward and elite wide receivers.
Dude, yeah, so Miami went from having maybe the worst defense in the Power Four the season before. It was terrible, especially in the secondary. And this year, they had the best defense in their conference and maybe the best in the country. So huge props to Corey Heatherman for just turning this defense around so quickly. They were top 5 in opponents' points allowed per game, top 12 in yards allowed per game. They were especially great at stopping the run. They ate dual threat quarterbacks for breakfast. Quarterbacks did not run against Miami. They were super efficient there. They were the third best team in the country at sacking quarterbacks, and in my opinion, the best at getting pressure. Mesidor and Bain were always swarming into the backfield. If there was a weakness on defense, I guess it was still the secondary, but usually quarterbacks did not have much time to throw the ball anyways, because they were constantly under duress. The transformation of this defense under Corey Heatherman, like I said, just night and day, dude. They were atrocious last year, and they're incredible this year. I expected defensive improvement, like I said, but not even close to this extent. So, as much as I hate Miami, I cannot take that away from them.
But it could be more balanced and steady behind a strong run game and a veteran O-line. On defense, they should improve thanks to Heatherman and better talent up front, but depth and secondary are still big question marks, and they have a lot of stuff to fix in that defense. I still see Miami as a very good team, just not the unstoppable shootout machine from last year. Better defense, slightly worse offense overall.
They didn't have to be.
Maybe a healthier balance, but a lower ceiling. At number 4,
definitely not a lower ceiling. I would call this a pretty successful season for Miami. They made it to the national championship game where they had an opportunity on the last drive to win the game. They earned the clear number 1 spot in my final ACC ranking, so I was obviously too low on them, although I don't even think anyone could have predicted just how good that defense was going to be after how they looked the year before. I was right about them being them having some offensive regression and defensive improvements, but I don't think that I was correct on how drastic that would be.
Or I have the SMU Mustangs. They were my dark horse last year, and they definitely delivered, making it all the way to the playoffs. And guess what? I don't think they're going anywhere this season either. They have an offense that is built to reload, not just rebuild. They have Kevin Jennings coming back at quarterback, and he has proven that he can lead this team. He's a dynamic playmaker. He can extend plays with his legs and sling it downfield. The only real issue with him is ball security. He threw way too many picks last year, so that's something that will need to be cleaned up. And also, there is some turnover around him. 4 of SMU's top 5 receivers are gone, but SMU does like to spread the ball around, so I'm not too worried. Plus, Jordan Hudson, the second most productive receiver at SMU last year, is back. And they have some highly touted recruits that's going to step in. Senior Romello Brinson adds a true deep threat ability, and they have 2 reliable tight ends that return, so not too worried there. The offensive line, though, should be the real strength. Returners like All-ACC P.J. Williams and Savion Byrd, they're coming back. Logan Parr is one of the best guards in the league. And Miami transfer Zion Nelson, who has NFL-level upside, also in this group, should be fantastic. At running back, they are losing Bashard Smith, which does hurt. They're going to move to more of a committee approach this year. So it wouldn't really shock me if Jennings himself leads the team in rushing. But the bottom line here is that this team might be a touch less explosive, but with Lashley calling plays, the offense will still be dangerous. On defense,
we kind of got what we expected out of Kevin Jennings. He wasn't quite as mobile on the ground this season, so he did not end up leading the team in rushing like I thought that he might. But he was just slinging the ball around, so, whatever.
Like last year, he did still have some ball security issues. He threw too many interceptions, but he also threw a lot of dots. Jordan Hudson did step into that wide receiver one role really nicely, and as expected, even with the loss of their top receivers, SMU had no problem moving the ball through the air. They spread the ball around like I said that they would to a myriad of talented receivers. They were a top 10 passing offense in the country, and that led them also to being a top 10 scoring team when in the red zone. They were not nearly as effective in the run game despite having a solid offensive line. As you saw, though, I was not super surprised by that after they lost their best running back. They were an offense that usually put up a lot of points, so I think that they ended up being exactly what I expected them to be on offense. They are quietly elite and about to get even better. People really slept on this defense last year, but they were 7th nationally against the run and 10th in sacks, and they bring back the foundation plus some strong transfers. The secondary could be scary good. They have maybe one of the best
secondary wasn't
country.
scaring
They
anybody.
also have Ahmad Moses, who's a tackling machine. Corners Jalen Davis Robinson and Deuce Harmon can lock guys down, and the pass rush should still be ferocious. They have strong edge returners plus big help coming in through the portal, and on the inside they're even deeper and more physical up front. The biggest defensive question mark for me, though, is the linebacker core. They lost some leading tacklers in Kobe Lewis and Ahmed Walker, so production should still be solid, but depth could be an issue. So in summary, the offense might have slightly fewer fireworks.
Yeah, secondary was not scaring anybody. SMU was third worst in the country at pass yards allowed per game. Luckily, they did have a pretty good run defense and an edge rush. Their edge rushers were super solid, as I expected. They got pressure and accumulated sacks, and they were one of the best turnover margin teams in the country, which was especially massive and impressive considering how many interceptions Jennings threw. So the defense was opportunistic and very one-dimensional.
Works without the same proven wide receiver depth and star running back, but they are still built to score. The defense should squeeze even tighter, especially with a lockdown secondary and a nasty pass rush. And yeah, they have a harder schedule, but SMU will still be a brutal matchup and a real contender. This team was not a one-year wonder. They are here to stay. At number 3.
Yeah, so SMU was one win away from being in the ACC championship game with the possibility to go to the playoffs, but unfortunately Cal ripped those hopes and dreams away from them in overtime in the last game of regular season. Still, I think a lot of people expected SMU to fade back into irrelevance after their playoff appearance the year before, but instead they had another super solid season. They beat the national championship runner-up, Miami. They beat Louisville. They beat Clemson. They won their bowl game against Arizona at the end of the season, and they just sure they had some head-scratching losses against teams like Wake Forest, Cal, TCU, and Baylor, but an 8-win regular season is not too shabby. I had them at number 3 in my final ACC rankings, and they're number 4 here in the preseason, so no complaints here.
3, I have the Louisville Cardinals, and it's year 3 under Jeff Brom, and you'd have to say that Cardinals fans are pretty dang happy. They haven't broken through for an ACC title yet, but they are very close, and could this be the year? Maybe.
Nope.
On offense, Brom is rolling with another transfer quarterback, and at this point, you just have to trust that he will make it work. He's really good with quarterbacks, and this year it's Miller Moss coming over from USC, and we've already seen what Moss can do. In fact, we've seen him carve up Louisville's own defense in the 2023 bowl game. He's accurate, he's efficient, he's battle-tested, even if he has had some ups and downs. He's in the right system, too. Brom gets the most out of his quarterbacks, much like Lincoln Riley does at USC, and Moss won't have to do it alone. He has some strong targets like veterans in Chris Bell and Colin Lacey. Dynamic backfield combo of Isaac Brown and Duke Watson, who can carry some of that load. And the O-line, it's a bit of a rebuild after last year's excellent performance, but there's still talent up front, and there's still some new faces that are going to need to step up to keep that unit as a strength. On defense, they're solid, but not elite.
Yeah, Miller Moss was a solid quarterback, but he did not break through like I thought he was going to, and that really extends to the offense as a whole. Normally, Jeff Brom puts together a really explosive offense, but that was not really the case this year. They were very pedestrian in a lot of ways, and sure, if you check the stats, it looks like Miller Moss was a great
quarterback this season. He wasn't throwing a lot of interceptions. He threw for an impressive amount of yards, but I don't think the stat sheet tells the whole story. Louisville could not score in the red zone. They were one of the weaker teams in the country through the air, and they were just okay on the ground. So there just wasn't a lot to me that stood out. I mean, the key players that I expected to stand out did, like Chris Bell, Colin Lacey, and Isaac Brown, but they didn't stand out as much as I expected them to, if that makes sense.
Louisville's defense should hold its own, but there are definitely some questions. The pass rush is losing Ashton Gillette, which definitely hurts. The ends are still good, but not quite the same bite there. The interior of this line has the potential to be a real strength for this team over time, but we're going to wait and see. The linebacker core has TJ Quinn returning. He was the leading tackler last year, and they have Stanquan Clark, who could be a real difference maker outside. Depth, though, is still a concern. Secondary, obviously a big question mark. They lost almost everyone at corner. The new high potential guys are coming in, but we need to see if they can step up quickly. Overall, the front seven should be fine, but it's not the dominating group that we've seen from some other ACC contenders. In summary, another Bromlett.
Yeah, surprisingly, defense was actually the strength of this team this season. I don't normally think defense when I think of Louisville or Jeff Brom, but here we are. Teams had a pretty difficult time moving the ball against Louisville, second best in the conference at limiting yards per game. They weren't outstanding at anything, really, but there also were no huge holes or weaknesses to this defense. They were just a pretty good defense across the board.
Offense that should keep humming with Miller Moss at quarterback, good backs, and solid receivers. Defense is likely going to be good enough, but not quite elite, with a pass rush secondary that has some depth concerns. Louisville has the right coach and returning production, and portal helps stay near the top. They've been knocking on the door, and while it's not a perfect roster, this might be the year that they finally break through. At number 2,
so it wasn't, but Louisville as a team was kind of the opposite of what I expected them to be when it came to their strengths and weaknesses. However, I was still pretty accurate with my predictive ranking and placement of them. I had them at number 4 in my final rankings and number 3 in my preseason rankings. So like SMU, they had some huge wins over teams like Miami and Pitt. Plus, they beat their rival Kentucky, but they also lost to some of the bigger dogs in the conference, like Virginia and SMU. They also had some losses to teams like Cal and Clemson thrown in there. Overall, I would call it a pretty solid season for the Cardinals. They were one of the better teams in the conference, but not quite the best.
I'm probably going to catch some flack because I have a team here that a lot of people probably wouldn't put this high, but I truly believe in them, and that's Georgia Tech. They are my dark horse for the ACC.
I feel pretty good about
year,
that, honestly.
And that's because I believe in what Brent Key is building in Atlanta. They showed some flashes of brilliance last year. Sure, there was mixed inconsistency in there, but if you look at the games that they played, with them beating Miami, going into 8 overtimes with Georgia, and stunning Florida State, the pieces are there. But now they've got the roster, they've got the momentum, and one of the best recruiting classes in school history. So the question is, can they finally put it all together and crash the ACC title game? Well, on offense, it all starts with Haynes King, one of the most underrated quarterbacks in the country. He's dynamic, he's mobile,
so good.
He can carve up defenses with his arm and his legs. Next to him, Jamal Haynes, their electric running back, he's also back. He's going to get a huge workload, though, and there isn't really a clear running back 2 behind him, so depth is a concern. But, dude, he is dynamite. The O-line quietly became a strength last season, allowed the 3rd fewest sacks in the nation, opened lanes for almost 5 yards per carry, so that's obviously going to be great for Jamal Haynes. The interior should be really strong with guys that will really be able to anchor that unit, but tackle depth and edge protection are the big question marks for me. And also at receiver, they're losing their top target in Eric Singleton, which definitely hurts. They bring back productive pieces like Malik Rutherford and Eric Rivers from FIU, who just dominated there, and so they should be pretty good, but still depth is thin, and someone new has to step up to give King more weapons. On defense, last year
Georgia Tech was my dark horse this season, and for most of the season, it looked like they were going to play for an ACC title, but they lost some steam towards the end of the season. The endurance, it's hard to play full schedule of games, but I still believe in what Brent Key is building down there, and I think it is only a matter of time before they make it to the ACC championship game and maybe even win one. Haynes King was exactly the kind of player I've been saying that he was, and I expected him to be once again. Obviously, there wasn't a lot of guesswork there. We knew what kind of player he was, and he consistently carried Georgia Tech on his back. Even though he played at a rival school to Georgia, it was hard to root against him. He was just such a tough player that could stick his head through the fan and take it hit after hit and get the win for his team. He was an incredibly mobile quarterback. He led the team in rushing, and he probably led the conference in all quarterback rushing stats. I'm pretty sure he led the ACC in rushing scores at the very least. He also was a better passer than he gets credit for. He knows his capabilities, and he plays pretty well within those. He threw for almost 3,000 yards this season and only had 6 interceptions. Jamal Haynes, he was not quite as good as he was the season before, but Malachi Hosley, I hope I'm saying his name right, he became the guy on the ground when it wasn't King running the ball himself. Georgia Tech's offensive line was pretty solid as well, which definitely helped. But this was really the Haynes King show, and whenever he was on, the team was on fire. But when he was a little shaky, the whole team suffered. Thankfully, he was usually on. In fact, they were the second best total offense team in the ACC, if that tells you anything. This defense could stuff the run, get teams off the field on third down, but they struggled badly with pass rush and forcing turnovers. Up front, They lost Romelo Height, but added 2 portal pass rushers plus Matthew Alexander inside. It's an overhaul, but there's reason to think that they'll actually get more pressure than they did last year. And at linebacker, they're solid and they're deep, especially in coverage, but nobody jumps out of the page as a new playmaker to fix the pass rush problems. In the secondary, they return solid tacklers and pass breakers, but still struggle to force INTs. And the new DC specializes in coaching DBs, so they should improve overall, even if takeaways don't skyrocket. In summary, Georgia Tech brings back a lot. Unfortunately for Georgia Tech, Haynes King does not play defense, or could not play defense for them as well. They had some of the same issues they had last season, and then some. They couldn't get turnovers. They couldn't get teams off the field. They weren't particularly good at generating pressure and getting sacks either. Teams usually didn't have too much trouble moving the ball against them through the air or on the ground. So, yeah, defense is where they really struggled, honestly. A lot of really good pieces, including an underrated but dangerous quarterback in Haynes King, a star running back in Jamal Haynes, mostly solid offensive line, and they added smart portal pieces on defense and have one of their best recruiting hauls ever. The biggest questions here are who's going to step up at running back, can the defense finally force turnovers, and do they have enough depth if injuries hit? But the bottom line here is that barring major injuries, there's really no excuse that this team can't take a leap forward. And I think that they will. Don't be surprised if Georgia Tech buzzes all the way to the ACC championship game. And they almost did, dude. They were the team that had, I think, a multiple game edge on everybody else, and they just couldn't bring it home at the very end. But anyways, overall was a pretty good season for the Yellow Jackets, losing only 3 games in the regular season. One was a close game to their rival Georgia, which you can't really fault them for. The other was against North Carolina State in Pitt. They had some close calls throughout the regular season, including a very controversial win over Wake Forest, but they also had impressive wins over Duke and Clemson. But still, Brent Key is doing an excellent job in Atlanta, keeping Tech closer to the top of the conference than the bottom of the conference where they normally are. I had them at number 6 in my final rankings, despite them having a better record than some of the teams above them. And that is for a variety of reasons, mainly because we've either seen the teams above them beat them head-to-head, so we know that they're better than them, or because other teams had more impressive wins, which showcased more of their potential as a quality team. So that's why. Brings us to my number 1 team in the ACC, the Clemson Tigers. And the gap between Clemson and the rest of the conference this year feels pretty wide. And it's not just built on some fancy transfer class or quick fixes. It's old school Dabo. Development, homegrown talent, and continuity. And for the first time in years, this team truly feels like one of those classic Clemson contender teams. Cade Klubnik is back at quarterback, and he took a massive step forward under Garrett Riley's offense last year, and I expect him to keep trending up. The offensive line, one of the best in the conference with 4 starters back. They're elite in pass protection, and if they can get a little nastier with run blocking, this group becomes truly special. But the big difference between this team and past Clemson teams is the wide receivers. Antonio Williams is a legit next-level talent. TJ Moore is strong on the outside. Bryant Wesco, dynamic weapon. Plus transfer Tristan Smith, who adds some depth. For the first time in a while, Klubnik has real playmakers everywhere. The biggest question, though, for offense is the running back situation. Jay Haynes could shine if he stays healthy, and true freshman Gideon Davis has big play speed, but he's lighter and less physical.
Running the ball.
Even so, Riley calling plays and this wide receiver room means Clemson's offense should be dangerous again. On defense, Clemson was good, but not quite vintage Clemson.
Yeah, I drank the Clemson Kool-Aid. I believed in the returning production, the development, the added wide receiver talent, the proven quarterback. I thought that if Dabo's way of doing things was ever going to work in the new era, it would be this year. But instead, I left the season more convinced than ever that the game has passed Dabo by. Cade Klubnik did not continue his upward progression. In fact, I think he regressed. Sure, he added some mobility. He didn't throw a ton of interceptions, and he threw for almost 3,000 yards, all of which is very impressive, but he could not get it done in the red zone where it actually mattered. And don't get me wrong, there was improvement in the wide receiver room, but where the receivers were successful, the run game was not. And I said that would be a question mark here in the preseason video, but man, it was bad. And it didn't help that the O-line greatly underachieved.
Good, especially versus the run. This year, they look deeper and more versatile. Will Health transfers in to take some pressure off of star edge TJ Parker, and the interior line has the size. The question here is consistency against the run. At linebacker, they bring back their 2 top tacklers, and they add transfer from Alabama Jeremiah Alexander for even more punch. The real strength, though, is the secondary. Avian Terrell is a future NFL player, and the whole DB unit is experienced, talented, and deep. Overall, this defense should kick into another gear. Better up front, elite in coverage, and nasty in pursuit.
Definitely not elite in coverage.
Clemson finally had.
Definitely not elite in coverage. On defense, they were pretty pedestrian overall. Their secondary was pretty terrible, but the run defense was actually pretty solid, and they generated some decent pressure. I really thought that they would be more successful on the back end with the talent they had, but that just was not the case, and it definitely burned me.
Man. Explosive receivers again. And Klubnik should keep improving, and the O-line is a real strength. Plus, the defense brings back talent, adds smart transfers, and has NFL guys on the back end. Dabo did not overhaul through the portal. He built from within, and it looks like it's working. This isn't just the best team in the ACC. This is a legit playoff and national title contender. If the Tigers can stay healthy and the run defense tightens up, they might finish the season exactly where they used to be, on top of college football.
Definitely not there. Overall, a very, very disappointing season for the Clemson Tigers. A lot of people, including myself, expected them to be one of the best teams in the country this season, and they just were not. I think the team as a whole got better towards the end of the season, I guess, but it was too little too late anyways. It obviously was not the nail in the coffin for Dabo Swinney, but unless they take a different approach to talent acquisition soon, they will not see success again in this modern era. I mean, it was just embarrassing how mismatched Clemson looked at times this season. I mean, they lost to Syracuse, the worst team in this conference. They lost to Syracuse. Granted, Stephen Jelly was playing, but still, Syracuse. They lost to Georgia Tech, who, solid team. SMU, again, solid team. But those are teams that should not be beating a team or a program like Clemson. Man, they finished season at number 8 in my final rankings, which is obviously much different from where I had them here at the start of the season, number 1. I can't remember who I predicted to win the national championship, but it was between Clemson, Penn State, and LSU. And it's kind of funny because all those teams drastically were underachieved. So whoever it was, I fumbled on my national championship prediction. But anyways, that's all for this video, guys. We have one more conference to get to before we end the series, so stay tuned for that, and stay tuned for more content this offseason that I cannot wait to share. Peace.